We're going to talk about, what was going on with Tim Plough, what's going on with Dirk Koetter, and what to look forward to with the next offensive coordinator. Apparently, there's news that things could move pretty quickly here on the offensive coordinator. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master of Football, back at it again. Happy Sunday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on all things college football, EA college football, pro football, Madden, anything related to football, hit that red subscribe button. It won't cost you anything. All it's going to cost you is being up to date on all things college football, anything football related. Without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, guys, so here I am. I've got my cold gear and everything like that. I just watched the Mountain West Championship game between Boise State and Fresno State. It was not the result that I wanted it to be. Congratulations to Fresno State. They are the Mountain West champions for year 2022. However, this video is going to be about a conversation I had with my boy, Bronco Blameyer. We wanted to discuss something here. We're going to talk about the offensive coordinator position here. As you know, if you're familiar with Boise State football, after the UTEP loss on the road, we fired Tim Plough, the offensive coordinator, brought in Dirk Koetter, who was an offensive analyst, then became the full-time offensive coordinator for the remainder of the season. They have since gone, counting this game, 7-2. And again, they were really playing with house money. They were 2-2, and we were like, we're not even sure if we're going to make a bowl game. And now we're going to be, we are 9-4, pretty good, but again, not where we want to be. Freshman quarterback, Hank Bachmeier transfer away. There's a lot of things like that. However, we're going to discuss all of that. We're going to discuss where Boise State offense has been in previous years, especially before the Andy Avalos era. We're going to talk about, what was going on with Tim Plough, what's going on with Dirk Koetter, and what to look forward to with the next offensive coordinator. Apparently, there's news that things could move pretty quickly here on the offensive coordinator, but we're going to have a big discussion here. This is between me and my boy Bronco Blameyer. Stay tuned at the end of the video because he's got a special offer for you. But without further ado, let's get into that interview. All right, everybody, and it is time for the conversation we are all looking forward to. Now, we are filming this ahead of time, so I want to make sure that I preface this conversation here because I want to make sure we can use the previous 12 games and also last season as our reference and not just the Mountain West Championship game. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking with my boy Jake about Boise State's potential new offensive coordinator. And again, it's one of those situations where if the result doesn't go the way we want it to against Fresno State, it's like, you need to run the ball more. You need to pass the ball more. We want to make sure we've got a good set of information so far throughout the season, and we're not necessarily, living in the now. But Jake, real quick, 30 seconds. Who are you, my friend?
Hey, Bronco Blameyer, so excited to be here. We have done so many videos together. I feel like if you're not on the wagon knowing who the two of us are right now, then you definitely need to hop on. Make sure you subscribe to Master Football's channel. Great football content. Then also, while you're at it, hop on over, jump on my channel, Bronco Blameyer. Great Boise State Mountain West content all season long and during the offseason as well. So big support of the Boise State Broncos. And let's talk some new offensive coordinator ideas here today.
Let's do it. And remember, at the end of this, we got a special offer from my boy Jake, but we're going to get into that at the very end here. So what this interview is going to be right now, we've got 4 hot questions. I have tasked these, given Jake some time to look this kind of up. We're going to go back and forth on a couple of these things here because just to make sure we preface here what happened here. So early on in the season, a guy by the name of Tim Plough, who was originally brought on Andy Avalos's his roster, his initial coaching staff. Let's just say he didn't make it very far, got let go after the 4th game. And then Dirk Koetter, who was a offensive analyst, came on as offensive coordinator to end the season. Dirk Koetter has already announced that he is no longer going to be the OC, hence the reason why we're having this conversation right now. But let us get into it right now. So very first question, this is going to be kind of like a question about the history of Boise State. So here we go. Boise State history is known for a wide open offense and explosive offenses. Give us a brief breakdown of BSU offense throughout the years running up to just before the Andy Avalos regime.
Well, like you said, explosive, heavy attack. But a lot of people forget that Boise State's offense has always been built around a balanced attack. The big names, the quarterbacks capture the limelight. I mean, we all know Kellen Moore, but even before that, you had Jared Zabransky, Ryan Dinwiddie, going all the way back to Bart Hendricks. So Boise State has always had the quarterback who's taken the central spotlight. Boise State's always had that running back that they lean on as well. It's been a balanced attack format. It has a lot of heavy usage in the passing game, but at the end of the day, it's built around a bell cow, 1,000-yard type back. Boise had a long streak there of 1,000-yard running backs going all the way back to Ian Johnson. So you always had that central running back who could establish the running game and the passing game going over the top. The difference with the Boise State offense that we're seeing right now is that it is a game built around the running game versus a game built around the passing game. Not so much a balanced attack in that it is focusing on establishing the run first, and you'll have 200 something yards rushing, and then you'll have passing game looking at like 150 to 200 somewhere. And so Boise State fans have been a little bit intrigued by this. I think when you start talking about new offensive coordinators, start looking at, okay, do we go with what has been working so far with this season? You had a great running attack and some running backs and quarterbacks, or do you want to establish a little bit more of that Boise State way where you had kind of the two central backs? I think if Helani comes back next year, you can't go around just one central back. You have to go around two guys, and we've got some more recruits coming in. So you might see Boise State shifting to more of a running back based offense that uses multiple backs in the offense, which is going to be very interesting when it comes to looking at offense coordinators. Because if you look at, we'll talk about this later in the video, but when you talk about like guys Boise State might go after, former alumni, that kind of thing, they aren't really running that kind of offense. So the question then becomes, again, do you want to run the traditional Boise State attack, which has been the balanced attack focused on the passing game, or do you want to run what Dirk Koetter has done so effectively, which is still somewhat of a balanced attack? I mean, most games you are looking at about 200 something passing, 200 yards rushing, but very much focused on that running game.
Yeah, and you also mentioned there the fact that, like, I think people from the outside perspective, I went to a game at the University of Virginia, and my taxi driver was like, "Oh man, Boise State, you guys, all those passing yards, all those passing yards, all those passing yards." You mentioned there the fact that how many 1,000-yard rushes we had in a row there because of how often it was a really balanced attack. You think about the tight ends too. We got John Bates, Jeb Putzier. I think that's how you pronounce his name, Jeb Putzier, back in the day. But anyways, like tight ends, running backs, balanced attack, wide open offense, but also lots of trick plays, a lot of creativity. I think the reason why is because BSU doesn't have bad athletes. Don't get me wrong with that. But we can't line up like, Ohio State. How many first-round receivers have they had in the last couple of years? All they really got to do is run go routes and slants, and they could beat a lot of teams. BSU's got to outthink their opponents. But like you said, balanced attack. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think that's a great point. That is a great point because when you look at the offense that Plough was trying to run, it actually was kind of stereotypical of those Boise State offenses of the past. The big issue is that you didn't have a great offensive line to give you time in the pocket, and you didn't have breakaway wide receivers that you could just throw the ball over the top to. I mean, last year's offense looked okay because you had Khalil Shakir. This year's offense, with the wide receiver depth really depleted, you didn't have that guy who could take over a game. A lot of people thought Cobbs was going to be that guy. He didn't turn out to be that guy. So you didn't have that wide receiver that you could just chuck it up to. So while this new Boise State offense under Dirk Koetter looks a lot different, it is in some ways very similar to Boise State offenses of the past because it's very, very creative. I mean, what did we see? George Helani threw a pass to Taylor Green the other day. I mean, that was insane. So you're seeing trick plays getting used back again, which I don't think Tim Plough really called any trick plays at all. He used some kind of more creative plays at the goal line, but they weren't really truly trick plays besides the pass to Matlock versus Utah State. So you're seeing trick plays back in the game. You're seeing tight ends are getting a heavy focus. I mean, you had a new guy last week who hadn't seen really in action this season. He has 3 catches. So, and then you of course, you've got Hopper, and then Riley Smith's banged up. But you got some great tight ends, Kurt Raffdale. They're all getting action. And then you're seeing a running quarterback, which let's remember, Boise State's offenses of the past, the passing quarterbacks have gotten the limelight and the attention in the recent years. But Boise State actually used to really kind of rely on these mobile and, should I say, running quarterbacks. I mean, you go back to Jared Zabransky. I mean, that was a guy who Taylor Green reminds me a lot of ways. I think he's kind of Jared Zabransky improved because he's a better runner, and he's a better runner than Jared Zabransky. I don't think he has quite the same arm quite as yet that Jared Zabransky showed, but I think that Taylor Green can use a lot of those same breakaway speed and mobility that Jared Zabransky had. And then Ryan Dinwiddie was mobile. He wasn't a runner, but he was mobile. And Bart Hendricks, he had 200, 300 yards rushing every season as well. So Boise State has always kind of, you look at those classic Boise State offenses, the passing game got the focus, but they had great running backs, and they had, for the most part, some really mobile quarterbacks in there as well that were able to add their feet in the running game. So I really like what Dirk Koetter is doing with this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even we're thinking about Grant Hendrick back when they went to the Fiesta Bowl there, like he could run just enough. Basically, and I think the thing about BSU quarterbacks is the fact that for the most part, they've been, 5'11" to 6'1", good feet, accurate, and can move a little bit there. Kellen might not have been able to move as much, really accurate out there. Grant Hendrick might not have the arm and the mind that Kellen has, could move a little bit more. So that, again, you could threaten the defense in multiple different ways.
Absolutely. And recently we've had kind of gotten used to those passing quarterbacks because we had Bachmeier and Rippon back to back, for a span of, what was it, 8 years there, right? They were both 4-year quarterbacks. So, Bachmeier and Rippon back to back, and neither of those guys were truly running quarterbacks. But Taylor Green brings something to this game that is just completely different than anything that any Boise State quarterback has done, and at the same time similar to what a lot of guys have done. And so it's a great combination of saying, all right, when we're reshaping this offense and looking for a new offensive coordinator, let's do something different. Let's do like Dirk Koetter has. Let's do something different because Boise State's kind of plateaued a little bit. They haven't been the team that's going out and winning the Fiesta Bowls anymore, or getting the CFP looks, or getting high up in the rankings. Boise State's plateaued a little bit. They need something different, but at the same time, Taylor Green also has characteristics that are traditional to Boise State quarterbacks in the past, so you can still keep yourself tied to those traditional historic offenses while building something different for the future. It's a very exciting time for being an offensive coordinator for Boise State.
Absolutely. And we will get into the future. However, let's talk about the next question here, because the next question is not as happy as the first question. So the next question here. So number 2, what were your impressions of Tim Plough's offense? What were the structural, not necessarily results-oriented issues that led to his dismissal? What was going on with Tim Plough's offense?
Well, first off, I think he was a really smart guy, and I think even his critics acknowledged that he was intelligent, that he had a good mind for looking at the game. The issue with Tim Plough was that he wasn't adaptive. He could come in with a great game plan. Most of the time, Boise State scored on their first drive of the first half and the second half. They came out with a pre-canned game plan, and they went out and they executed. In the red zone, they weren't terrible. They were, once they got inside the 20, you saw a lot more creativity being used. It was between the 20s and the routine. All right, the defense is adjusted. Now I've got to call something. That is where Tim Plough had issues. I would have loved to have seen him as an offensive analyst drawing up plays in the back room, and Dirk Koetter making the calls as offensive coordinator. I think that would have been a perfect mesh. But when you talk about the structural issue, I think another thing that handicapped Tim Plough was that his offense wasn't what Andy Avalos wanted to run. So Tim Plough, he's an air raid style guy. You look at everything he did at UC Davis, it was all air raid style attacks. He comes in, and Andy Avalos says, I want a running based offense. Former linebacker, he loves to have those defenses fresh, keep the offense on the field as long as possible, wear down the defense. He says, I want a run-based offense. Tim Plough did not know how to call a running play to save his life. I mean, if you remember the UCF game, 8 was it straight up runs up the middle on 3 straight possessions? Yeah. He did not know how to call a running play to save his life. And so he's trying as offensive coordinator to say, okay, I'm trying to adjust my boss, trying to do what you want. But at the same time, that's not his route. So I think another issue that we saw with Tim Plough is we never actually got to see Tim Plough's offense. What we saw was Tim Plough trying to do Andy Avalos' offense from an air raid perspective, and it just never worked out. They never meshed. I have a lot of respect for Tim. I think he gets a lot more hate than he deserves to. But I do think that his offense was a failure here because he never got to fully express his talent, which would have been pass-heavy attack.
Yeah, and you were commenting there about it too, and you see this a lot in the NFL where you'll see the fact that like there are a lot of people who can call plays that can't be head coaches, a lot of people who can be great position coordinators that aren't necessarily offensive coordinators. So it's one of those things where you're right, where the offensive coordinator has an envision, but then the head coach is like, I need this, this, and this. Like you mentioned before, defensive coordinator likes to shorten the game, give me that run game, let me shorten the game up, help my defense out, things like that. You mentioned that the running game was such an issue, absolutely anemic. If you ever want to throw up as a Boise State fan, go and rewatch the third quarter against UCF last year. It was the worst quarter I think I've ever seen in my entire. I think it might have been -6 yards or something like that. It was absolutely awful. But again, continuing on with that too, you'd mentioned there the fact that if he was given kind of carte blanche to do what he wanted, he probably would have had some good plays in this and that. However, you also mentioned too, second half adjustments. UCF 21-0, lost that game. Oklahoma State, I believe 20-0, lost that game. Lots of leads early, couldn't hold on to them. No running game, didn't establish a line of scrimmage, and it ultimately cost him in the end.
Well, and that just shows, again, his lack of experience there with the running game, because you come out in the second half and say, okay, we've got a lead, let's establish something, the running game. But you can't just run it and turn the ball over after 3 downs, because then that defeats the entire purpose of the running game. And so I think that was one of the biggest issues, the fact that, again, he couldn't adapt well, but also when he was trying to adapt with the running game, he then wasn't able to find success on the ground. He tried to go back to the passing game, but at that point, the quarterback and the wide receivers are out of sync because they've been using the running game so much. You've killed all your momentum, and then it was just a train wreck. And so I think that there were a lot of issues with Tim Plough that were, under his control in his inability to just go out there and adjust to what the defense was giving. But at the same time, right before right after UT Martin game and before the UTEP game, there were a lot of reports out there where Andy Avalos was basically saying, yeah, he's not running the offense that I want him to. I want us to be running more of a run-based offense, and Tim Plough was saying, I'm not being able to run the offense I want to because I'm having to make these adjustments, to paraphrase a little bit there. So, neither person was being able – Andy Avalos wasn't being able to put the offense that he wanted on the field. Tim Plough wasn't able to put the offense that he wanted on the field. And I think that's where Dirk Koetter stepping up, that's why it's changed so many things for this offense, because now you finally have a meshing of viewpoints, and that leads into discussion of success here for Dirk Koetter.
Yeah, and also too, like, you see the fact that he left after the got fired I believe the Sunday after the UTEP game, and then Hank Bachmeier transfers to. Think about that situation. Let's just say you're Hank Bachmeier right now. Your senior year, you're ready to go. Let's go out and do well. You come on the road, you lose to UTEP, who the year before you put up 50 on, and you come out and you lose to them there. I feel bad for Hank, but talk about that whole situation with Hank.
Man, that Hank is one of those players that I've respected for such a long time, and I still do. I've got a jersey here with his name on it. I really respect Hank, and I think he had so much potential. But the biggest thing I think that killed Hank overall was that he had no consistency at offensive coordinator, so he was never being developed. Each new offensive coordinator came in and had so many other things on their plate that they weren't able to focus on saying, okay, let's make sure Hank's getting the development that he needs to. And so he just kept getting thrown into new offenses, and we never saw any growth from that 2019 season. And I also don't think he had offensive coordinators that were necessarily out there focused on working with him. I would have loved to have seen what he would have done with Dirk Koetter. Dirk Koetter comes in here as offensive, stuck around. Yeah, maybe Taylor Green would have gotten the start there initially. But Hank Bachmeier, he could have been developed, I think. I think he could have learned so much from Dirk Koetter if he just stuck it out the rest of the season. It's not like he's gained much by leaving. He's not in another school right now. He could have waited till the end of the season to transfer. So that was a really tough situation. I think obviously Dirk Koetter comes in. He obviously indicated that Taylor Green was going to be the starter there, at least for the next game. And Hank Bachmeier said, sorry, that's not it. Boise State ended up you'll remember in 2019 when they went to and played Oregon in the Las Vegas Bowl, that Jalen Henderson had been the quarterback that had taken them to that game. Hank Bachmeier had gone out halfway through the season. I think it was after the win against Hawaii with an injury. Jalen Henderson carries them through, Mountain West champions, takes them to that game. He should have been the one to start and play that game. Hank Bachmeier is coming back just healthy enough to play. And there was a lot of rumors out there that the reason that Hank Bachmeier got the start was because he was going to transfer if he didn't get the start. So kind of that player that's like, I've got to be on the field. I've got to play. A little bit of an ego, a lot of quarterbacks have that. And I think that was kind of one of those unfortunate situations, which we saw that in the bowl game where Jalen Henderson didn't get started because Hank Bachmeier was like, well, if I'm healthy enough to play, you better play me. We come in here, Dirk Koetter takes over the reins. I think there was definitely an indication that Taylor Green was going to get the start because Hank Bachmeier transfers out. I think that's pretty indicative of that.
Yeah, and I also think the nail was in the coffin in my personal. The UTEP team was obviously the nail in the coffin, but I feel like there was just a certain souring. So I was at the UT Martin game. I know you were there too. Hank gets hurt, and people cheer when Talon takes the field. Remember, everyone here, fan is short for fanatic. I was as embarrassed as anybody else is out there. It was one of the lowest points in Boise State football. I did not enjoy that at all. JL Skinner actually got on Twitter and he was like, Bronco Nation, never do that again. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. But you could tell the fact that there was a lot of ants in the community there. But let's move on to some more positive things. We talked about that. Question number 3 here. Since that moment, and again, this is absolutely shocking, but since Boise State starts off 2-2, lose at UTEP, a team they put up 50 on the year before, then they get rid of their quarterback, their quarterback transfers. Their Tim Plough gets fired, and then Dirk Koetter steps in, Taylor Green steps in at quarterback, and they go 7-1. BSU is 7-1 since appointing former BSU and Tampa Bay Bucks head coach Dirk Koetter as their temporary OC What has he done to be so successful?
Well, I think it comes down to three reasons here, or three factors that have led to his success. Number one, he's just an incredible coach. There is no offensive coordinator currently in the game of college football who has as much experience than as Dirk Koetter does. He is a five-time FBS offensive coordinator. He's a two-time FBS head coach, including at the Power 5 level. He's a four-time offensive coordinator for the NFL, and he's a former NFL head coach. Name me one offensive coordinator who is a former NFL head coach in college football. That is absolutely insane. So he's the greatest, most experienced offensive coordinator in college football. He could probably have success with, Hawaii right now. I mean, he is that good of an offensive mind. Secondly, here, though, he knows how to call running plays. He knows how to work with the offense that Andy Avalos wants him to work with. Like I said, Tim Plough was a smart guy, but he didn't know how to call running plays. Dirk Koetter, he can call whatever you want him to. You want to have a pass. If Andy Avalos came out tomorrow and said, I want a spread option, pass heavy attack, he'd be able to do it. If he came out the next day and was saying, hey, let's just give the option a try. Let's just try and go all Air Force. Dirk Koetter could figure it out. He is that smart of a guy. So you say, all right, I want to run heavy attack. Dirk Koetter says, yeah, that's not necessarily what I did my whole offensive career, but I can figure it out. And he is that good of an offensive coordinator that he's able to work with Andy Avalos and say, okay, run attack, no problem. I can work with you on that. And I think that's been, we'll talk about the third factor here, but I think that is the biggest factor overall, is just that we finally have Andy Avalos's vision for this offense and the offensive coordinator's vision for this offense melding together. That is the biggest part of success. You have a coherent team working towards a goal. Then the third factor here is there's no ego, there's no agenda. He's doing this for his son and his son's friends. His son, wide receiver on the team, and he comes to his dad and says, I don't know for sure, but this is all, fictional here. He comes to his dad and says, hey, looks like we're going to be out an offensive coordinator. That sucks. And he says, you know what? I got you. So he is here to support his son. He's out golfing on the weekend, not recruiting. He has no ego or any kind of career attached to this. He is just going out and doing what he can as a father and as a Boise State fan, doing what he wants for the team that he loves and the fans, his son and this family that he loves so much. So he's just out here doing what he can to help the team. So he's completely moldable to Avalos's vision. He's adaptable to whatever Avalos wants to run. So he's an incredible head coach, offensive coordinator. He knows how to call running plays, and he just has no ego or agenda here. And so he can do whatever he needs to be adaptive and have success in his offense. It's the perfect blend.
Yeah, and it really is like the stars aligned on a lot of different things there. And I'll let you know. I know, but I want to make sure the people who are watching this know too. One of the big issues at Boise State, and are probably arguably a big reason why Brian Harsin left, probably the reason why Chris Peterson left too, isn't so much because of head coach pay. That is one reason too, but because it's so hard to keep any quality coordinator, because you're going to give them 400 grand, 800 grand, and they're going to get $3 million to go be an offensive coordinator or a head coach somewhere else. It's really hard to keep those guys there. Dirk Koetter, really unique situation, like you said before. Imagine somebody who's got 15 to 20 years of NFL and college head coach and play calling experience. He's seen every defense. He's adjusted every single running game. He knows how to call power, trap, zone, anything like that. He's got all of that experience there. You couple that with, if I may, one of certainly the most unique athletic specimens Boise State has ever had at offense. Of course, like Taylon Green, remember, preseason, I bet this. This is my perspective. I want to hear your perspective on this. Preseason, if you had a 7-on-7 drill, no scrambling, I bet that it would be Hank would be number one, Sam Vidlac would be the second best, and then Hank would be Taylor would be the third best. How would you feel like how he's done and grown so far from week 5 until now?
Well, let's not even take it back to week 5. Let's take it back to week 1, where he comes in State there, after Hank Bachmeier throws all those picks, comes in versus Oregon State and just didn't win the game for them, but like his performance in that game as a first time getting major playing time against a Power 5 team who's now top 25, beat Oregon, to go out there and play the way he did. He made some mistakes, but he had an incredible performance. You look at what he has done from week 1 to now, he is a completely different quarterback. I have never seen a quarterback grow so quickly in one season. And I think a big part of that, I have to believe a big part of that, is Dirk Koetter. You look at a guy with that much experience. He's seen it all. He has coached so many quarterbacks. I mean, there's probably an innumerable number of quarterbacks throughout his career at both the collegiate and the NFL level. He knows how to reach kids. He knows how to say, all right, let's move forward and build you to be the quarterback that you need to be for success in the future. So I think a big part of that's Dirk Koetter, but I've never seen a quarterback go from just raw talent at the beginning of the season with a lot of lack of control in the passing game, not knowing when it was best to run in the running game, to where now he's reading defenses. He's making decisions on whether to pass or run. He's not throwing as many. He hasn't thrown a pick in the last 4 games, and his passing game versus Utah State. That's what I'm trying to get at here. The passing game versus Utah State was the best passing performance I've seen out of Taylor Green this entire season. He was smooth. He was methodical. He put the ball exactly where his wide receiver could get it. Only his wide receiver could get it. He didn't have any near interceptions like he has in previous games. He was throwing into double coverage, but he was putting it over the wide receiver beyond the defense. So if it was going to be missed, it was going to be an overthrow. And at the same time, turns out a 91-yard running game on the ground, so the ground game hasn't gone away. A lot of times when you see quarterbacks get a little bit more comfortable in the pocket, get a little more comfortable with their arm, their running abilities start to kind of decline just a little bit because they take more of a focus on the passing game. But he is showing that he can do it all. I am so excited with the future here, but it's going to be so important to get an offensive coordinator who can develop and grow him and is focused on not just building this offense, but focused on building Taylor Green.
Perfect segue. You've done this before. I'm telling you, he's pretty good, guys. He's pretty good here. Perfect segue into the next and last question. And again, you talk about it right here. Okay. Ashton Ginty, freshman. Eric McAllister, freshman. Taylor Green, freshman. Doing really well. They've got a good young nucleus. Question number 4. Since Dirk has already announced he has no intentions of him being BSU's offensive coordinator long-term, as we said before, he was actually interviewed and he basically said, yeah, everybody's out recruiting right now. I'm going to play golf this weekend. So basically all he's got to do is draw up plays and go from there. He's not going to do this long-term. What should Boise State look for in their next OC? And also, do you have any names in mind?
Well, I have answers to both of those questions. Let's go off the top here. What traits should the next Boise State offensive coordinator have? I think we got to have 4 off traits here that we should be looking for. Number 1, and I think most important, even maybe giving up some of the traits in the other categories to get this one, is loyalty and familiarity with BSU. Like I said, the biggest thing overall that hurt Hank Bachmeier was the fact that he had a new offensive coordinator every single year that he was playing for Boise State until last season, when he gets a new offensive coordinator halfway through the season anyway. So every single year that he came and played for Boise State, he had a new offensive coordinator. There was no consistency. There was no long-term growth with him. Taylor Green is an incredible talent, and he has made incredible progression, but he's still raw. There is still a lot of things that he needs to build and needs to develop. There's so much more potential with his arm that we're only just starting to tap into. So whoever comes and is the offensive coordinator, not just for Taylor Green, but for this offense overall, I mean, you have a young, fresh, raw offense across the board. You're looking at great talent here in Genty, McAllister, Taylor Green, but those are all freshmen. These are all guys that are going to need a lot of development. You still have an offensive line that is still not very good. The offense that Dirk Koetter is running is making them look better because it is pounding and wearing down defenses and giving them more things to look at, but it's still not a very good offensive line. And the wide receiver core still has a lot of things to need to work on. Eric McAllister, another young, fresh, amazing talent that I have a lot of excitement for. He is someone who's going to be stepping up, I think, here in the future. But across the board, you just don't look at this offense and say, okay, we've got a Titus Young out there, or a Khalil Shakir or a Hightower, Herbeck, or something. We don't have a guy who can take over the game. We don't even have 2 of those guys. So whoever comes in is going to build this team. Through recruiting, he's going to need to develop those players, and he's going to need to stick around for a long time with this offense. I'm talking, 3 years. That's what we're looking at, is someone who's going to be willing to stick with this offense for 2 or 3 years and help put it on the right track. So that's going to be the number 1 thing, and we'll talk about what that means, but it probably means looking at someone who has a tie to Boise State already. This is kind of their dream school they want to come coach at. The second thing, energy and excitement. There's a lot of momentum with this fan base right now. We need someone who comes in with that same energy and excitement, who is going to not just bring it to the team, but also excite the fan base. Not somebody who the fans aren't going to look at and go, well, I'm not sure about this guy, and kill some of those momentum. We need someone that is a solid sell to this fan base that they can look at and go, wow, I'm buying in even more. I'm buying more season tickets. The energy in this fan base right now, the amount of games we've had near sellouts, hasn't been matched, I think, in the last 10 years at Boise State football. It feels like classic Boise State football again, and we need to continue to build on that with this new offensive coordinator hire. The third one here is he needs to be a dynamic recruiter. I mentioned it already. There's a lot of youth and freshness across this offense, but we need to keep building and developing that, and there are a lot of gaps, especially like at the offensive line and wide receiver, that need to be filled. Someone who can come in, has a breadth of experience across the country that can continue to pull from Texas, California, but also maybe reach out into the East Coast, which Boise State has not done a great job of recruiting at recently. Start tapping the whole country as a whole. So it's someone who's not just going to excite kids, but also have those connections overall. And then the fourth one here is comfortable with a run-focused offense. And I think that one right there, it's fourth, but it's not fourth because it's least important. That is going to be extremely important because the biggest issue with Tim Plough was that he was a pass-heavy guy. We don't necessarily have to bring in someone, from Army who's just going to run the ball the whole time. But we have to bring in someone who is comfortable with running as well. Someone who is at least running a balanced attack. No more pass-heavy guys. Nobody coming from Mississippi State or Washington State or something like that. We
need, like Mike Leach? No, just kidding.
We need someone who knows how to call running plays, even if that's not necessarily their focus. Someone who at least is familiar with the run-based offense overall. I'll let you talk on that before I talk about some names here, but that's my four biggest things: loyalty and familiarity with BSU, energy and excitement, dynamic recruiter, and comfortable with run-focused offense.
For me, I wanted to make sure that I have a couple of short-term and I have a couple of long-term goals. So short-term goals here is that I think that the big issue is whoever's the offensive coordinator that comes in is going to be like, oh my God, 6'6", 220, fast quarterback. Let's give him 25 or 30 carries a game. And I'm like, no, we want to make sure we can continue. Whoever the new offensive coordinator is does not fall in love with one athlete that's BSU's never really had before. Have something you can do on a year-to-year basis that you continue to build off of, and maybe some variations if a quarterback could run a little bit more, if the quarterback can pass a little bit better, kind of go from there. I want to make sure that's a short-term goal. I do not think, and if you see the carries, Taylon's not a 15, 20, 30 carry kind of guy. He's 8, 9. All it takes is one. You give him one carry at the end of the game, and it's 91 yards, and you call you on it. And then the remainder of that game, that defensive end stays outside, and the tackle can go up to linebacker, one less guy in the run game. That's a short-term goal I want to make sure is don't necessarily fall in love with something that doesn't happen every single year. It's hard to get 6'6", 220 with a rocket arm every single year. So I want to make sure that's an expectation. Going forward, too, I think you said it before. One thing that I see across college football a lot is unfortunately something that happens in anything else. People say the NFL is a copycat league. College is the same way. Do not have the same cookie cutter offense that comes back there, has 4 receivers and calls dives, runs bubble screens and fades and hitches and slants, and then expects to just, I'm a dynamic offensive coordinator because we get a lot of plays off. BSU and has, because of, again, we don't have bad athletes, but because of the lack of just the 5-star on the outside that can just beat his guy every single time, you need to be creative. Tight ends, motions, every single play, almost every single play has some sort of motion, some sort of shift. You got to get the defense to overthink. The West Coast offense is 10,000 formations, but only run like 30 plays, things like that. You just have a lot of variance, a lot of this and that. I think that a West Coast offense, lots of shifts, tight ends, and a running back focused offense. I love that idea there. The recruiting, I'm definitely with that. I do know that the long-term goal I want to make sure is that Andy has to be cognizant of this, is that Andy's going to run into the same issue everybody else has. If you get a quality name, he gets hired away. If you get a quality name, he gets hired away. So Andy has to be a little bit more involved in kind of a grooming process for an offensive coordinator situation. I'm not saying that it's not going to be impossible. Again, it'd be awesome if we could give an offensive coordinator $2 million and have him stay with us. However, more than likely, if they're solid, they're going to get taken away. Andy is a very good defensive mind. I do think Spencer Danielson's probably going to get plucked pretty quick here, but I do think that Andy has his hands on that defense a lot more than we would probably give him credit for. But he has to let them know we need to be able to run the ball. I like shifts. I like adjustments and play to your players' strengths. How that looks, we'll figure it out. But like you said, I really heavily like us recruiting in Texas. I'm telling you, I think we need to start getting into New Orleans. I wouldn't mind if we started to get into, and this is me just foreshadowing here, start to recruit in some areas that are Big 12 territory. I don't know. I'm just saying, hopefully, you never know, knock on wood. But I do know the cool thing about this is whoever they are, whoever steps in, they have the 2023 season and then the 2024 season. If you're the highest ranked group of 5 champion, you go to the playoff for the national championship. Granted, like this year, whoever that is, if that were to happen, you have to play probably at Ohio State, but you're still in line for the Natty. It's going to be tough. But the cool thing is whatever happens here, this freshman group that we were talking about, They're going to be juniors by then. So a lot of interesting things there. But yeah, you mentioned some names there. What do you got in mind?
So I got three quick categories here for offensive coordinators. The first one, and I'm going to go with this first because I don't think it's necessarily where we should go, but I'm going to go with it right off the top here because I think it's something that should be at least looked at. The guys that I'm going to talk about as my best picks for Boise State offensive coordinator, none of them are true run-based offenses. You look at Boise State alumni, there is no, and I might be mistaken, I might have overlooked someone, but nobody I found that is a Boise State alumni or is somehow linked to the program, former coach, that kind of thing. None of them are running true run-based focused offenses. It's a lot, because it's Boise State. Like I said, we talked about that balance attack. It's always been built around that big passing game. So none of them are necessarily running exactly this kind of offense that Dirk Koetter is running, or necessarily the offense I think that Andy Avalos wants to run. So I'd like to bring up two names, Mr. Outside Hires, that Boise State could potentially look at. I don't know if they're the best fit for this program, and they probably wouldn't fit that stability piece because they don't have that connection to Boise State, so they'd probably be moving on. But if you're wanting to look at two run-based offenses that still have a level of creativity to them, these are two guys to look at. Newland Isaac, the offensive coordinator for Coastal Carolina. That is an offense that would be exciting at Boise State. You look at what Coastal Carolina is running, it is the most hybrid offense I have ever seen. They run a power set. They run a spread option. They run straight up option. They break it out and they just go four deeps. I mean, that is an offense that runs everything across the board, is heavily built around a mobile, agile quarterback like Taylor Green, who can also throw the ball, and a good running back. And then fast, quick wide receivers, more the slot guys, versus looking at, those breakaway deep down the field type of threats. All of that sounds like what Boise State has right now. You bring in Newland Isaac. There's two offensive coordinators at Coastal Carolina, two co-offensive coordinators. I'm not sure which of them has the heavier hand in the offense, but Newland Isaac is the guy who works with the running backs, and I think that would be a big focus as well coming in. The spread option, run-based kind of RPO style would work really well at Boise State, so that's someone to look at. The second guy here, and it's the sixth highest rushing team in the group of five, and if you take out the academy teams, it's the third highest overall, is Trent McKnight, the offensive coordinator for Georgia State. He's, like I said, one of the top non-option rushing teams in the country. Their offense is built around a mobile quarterback. He has over 700 yards rushing, who can also pass over 2,400 yards passing. They are averaging 203.6 yards passing and 213.5 yards rushing. Sound familiar? This is a guy who could come in and do something similar to what Dirk Koetter is doing, and also continue to, I think, build and develop Taylor Green. He's a guy who's worked with quarterbacks there in the past as well. So if you're looking at two offenses outside of Boise State, no connection at all, but who might be able to come in and establish something very effective, those are two guys that you should look at. However, for me, they don't fit the number one factor here, which is the loyalty and familiarity with BSU. The biggest factor there being loyalty. Even if he's a step down, we need someone who can be consistent. I think that is the biggest issue right now. Focus with Boise State. 2014 season was great, but it was all built around one good offensive coordinator who left right away. And then after that, 2015 season, not that great. 2016, it just kind of all went downhill. Boise State needs some consistency here. So let's talk about the second category here. And this is my wild category. This is it. This is my wildest dreams come true. Been a good boy all year. Santa says, okay, we're going to give this one to him. These are guys I do not think are going to come, but who I would be, and I think all fans would say, this is our ideal pick. Number one, Kellen Moore. There is no way that he is going to leave.
You never know. I'm just kidding.
And he almost was offensive coordinator. He was almost the head coach at Boise State, and that didn't work out. He's not going to come be the offensive coordinator for Boise State. But can you imagine if Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, very, very, very soon to be head coach for sure, somewhere at that NFL collegiate level, it's coming, was to come and be the offensive coordinator for Boise State. That's my dream pick right out there, number one. No way it's going to happen, but that would be the best solution. The second guy here, though, and this guy used to be one of those realistic, he very well could be the next offensive coordinator, and now has become one of the wild names, Ryan Dinwiddie. When he came on my channel at the beginning of this season, and we were previewing the offense, I asked him straight up, I said, hey, have you had any interest in coming back and coaching at Boise State? And he said, absolutely. He said, I would love to work with Andy Avalos. I've told my wife already that, she should be ready at some point for a move back to Boise, look for some houses in the area because it's going to be coming in the future. Well, unfortunately for us, not for him, but unfortunately for us, head coach of the Toronto Argonauts, Canadian Football League, Ryan Dinwiddie, just won out and won their Super Bowl, the Grey Cup. The Grey Cup. So he is definitely not going to be coming back to Boise for a while. He's going to be sticking there with Toronto. And I'm not speaking for Ryan Dinwiddie. I haven't talked to him about this. I haven't messaged him and said, hey, you thinking of coming to be the offensive coordinator? So I'm not speaking for him. But if I was to look at what just happened this season, you don't see a lot of coaches that go win their professional sports top award, top championship game, and then come be the offensive coordinator at a collegiate team. So he is probably off the table, but that is a guy who, like I said, maybe sometime in the future will find his way back to Boise, and I think a lot of fans would love that. Great quarterback for Boise State. So obviously, Ryan Dinwiddie almost definitely off the table here. I mean, it would be a Dirk Koetter level coach coming to Boise State if that was to happen. But Dirk Koetter was a special kind of one-time situation. Those kind of miraculous situations happen very rarely in collegiate sports. So definitely someone to look at in the future. Great quarterback for Boise State. I think at some point, maybe he'll find his way back to Boise State, maybe as a head coach at some point. But for now, Ryan Dinwiddie probably staying up north of the border there. But the third guy here, and I think this might be a little bit of a divisive figure, but while a lot of fans may have had different feelings on this individual, none of them, I think, will argue that he was a brilliant offensive coordinator for Boise State. Brian Harsin. That is someone who is no longer coaching as a head coach right now. He's sitting back on that fat, what was it, $10 million plus, it was $15 million paycheck that Auburn gave him for.
Yeah, Auburn loves to pay coaches that aren't their own coaches. Auburn loves to pay coaches to leave.
It's a little bit of an addictive habit. I think someone should talk to them about that. But, they've got their hands full right now with a new coach from my Liberty Flames. So we've got Brian Harsin. That would be a great fit as far as his offensive mind coming back at a high level. The issue is, there's no way that he could, because he has an ego. I love Brian Harsin, but he definitely has an ego. There is no way that he would be able to come in and work, I think, successfully with Andy Avalos here as a former head coach of Boise State to come back and be the offensive coordinator at Boise State. Get the ego out of the way. I don't think there's a single coach in the country who would leave their school as a head coach and then come back the next term and only a few years back as also an offensive coordinator. That just doesn't happen. So those are the three kind of wild guys that you take them off the table. They're not going to happen. But if they did, those would be your ideal fits. Now, this guy, and I like this as a transition because I think he's halfway between wild and realistic, and it's Mike Samford. 2014 season. Brilliant offensive mind there for Boise State. He's got that connection to Boise State. He was a quarterback from 2000 to 2004. He's already been offensive coordinator one time, and he's kind of gone on a little bit of a journey. He left Boise State for Notre Dame. You can't fault him for that. You get an opportunity to go from the G5 level to one of the top national championship contender teams in the country there. So he goes to Notre Dame. Then he's the head coach for Western Kentucky for a couple seasons. Then he's back in the Mountain West at Utah State as an offensive coordinator. Then he's at Minnesota, and now he's at Colorado, and he's their interim head coach right now. That's not going to last, but he's their interim head coach, and he'll probably go back to being an offensive coordinator. That's a guy that has built his way up the ladder of success. He's really kind of risen quite quickly, and then he kind of came down a little bit. Now he's building his way back up. That's someone who might be a little bit of a wild guess, but I think that he is someone, if Boise State gave him the right package, if they said, all right, they presented him with the right formula, if he had the right personality with Andy Avalos, that's someone who Boise State could definitely bring back to this program. And you had under him, you had a very somewhat similar offense, not similar in that it was run heavy, but you had similar players. You had a very mobile, we were talking about it earlier, Grant Hendrick, very mobile quarterback there for Boise State, not just mobile, good runner as well. And then you had Jay Ajayi, who's one of the best running backs all time for Boise State. So you had a very similar kind of great quarterback, great running back. He was able to do great things with them. I think he would have success here at Boise State if we were able to convince him to come back. Now, the question is, does he have the loyalty factor? He's already left us one time. It was for Notre Dame, so that's a little bit different. But he has been jumping around between different schools quite a lot. Would he come back and be able to commit to Boise State? That would be the biggest question. But as far as offensive mind goes, he'd be a great pick. Couple of other names real quick here. Kirby Moore, someone that we're going to face here in the Mountain West Championship game tomorrow. He first-time offensive coordinator for Fresno State. If you're not going to get Kellen Moore, at least you can get a Moore.
Yeah.
More is better for coming here back to Boise State, wide receiver, of course, 2009 to 2013. It is a very much pass-focused offense, but it's not air raid. It's built around, obviously, I think the best quarterback in the Mountain West right now, and Jake Haener. You can't ignore that. It's very much built around him. When Jake Haener went away, the offense definitely struggled. But if you lose your best quarterback that your offense is built around, it's going to struggle anyway. So I don't think that any inconsistencies can be blamed on Kirby Moore. He's done a great job with Jake Haener. So could he come in and have success at Boise State? 277 yards passing, 130.6 yards rushing per game for Fresno State, but they're also not necessarily built up for that run-heavy attack. I would really like to see Kirby Moore come in. He's a young guy. He's young enough in his career that he's not going to be drawn away necessarily by a lot of other guys, a lot of other teams. He doesn't necessarily have that high brand visibility. I think that we could approach him and say, you want to come back to your alma mater, and we'll give you a good deal, but not necessarily have to come out and spend all the bucks to get him to come over. I think he's a very realistic option. I think he meets the excitement for the fan base. I mean, I think a lot of fans would love to see Kirby Moore come back. Hey, it might even bring Kellen Moore back from time to time to watch his brother. So I think he meets a lot of those options. I think the one thing that he doesn't necessarily have would be a dynamic recruiter, because he's just so new. I think obviously in California, he could bring some of that perspective, and I think he has the potential, but he doesn't have the proven track record, and he doesn't necessarily have the run-focused offense, because that's not what we've seen at Fresno State, but he's of the same brain stem as Kellen Moore, who's a genius. So some of that's got to come to Kirby as well. I'm sure that he could adjust and develop, and hey, maybe he could hit his brother up for some advice. So Kirby Moore would be a great one. A couple more guys here real quick. Former Boise State connections that might be a possibility. Bush Hamden, quarterback for Boise State from 2004 to 2008. He's been the offensive coordinator at Arkansas State, Davidson, and Washington. He was recently offensive coordinator under Chris Peterson there at Washington. And then now he's currently coaching quarterbacks at Missouri. He actually has quite a bit of experience there when you talk about what he's been able to do at the collegiate level. He would be definitely available. Quarterback coach at Missouri would definitely be willing to come be an offensive coordinator. He's definitely somebody Boise State could reach out to. During his time at Washington in 2018, they had a pretty good balanced attack there. 238 yards passing, 176.3 yards rushing. 2019 was a little bit of a down year for them, but they were still upwards close to 150 yards rushing per game. So he's definitely someone who could be approached by Boise State. And the last name here, Danny Langsdorf, quarterback for Boise State, 91 to 93. He's been an offensive coordinator in the CFL, so he has Canada connections. He was an offensive coordinator at OSU, Nebraska, and Temple, so he has the entire national geography. I mean, you're talking the whole country at this point, plus Canada, so he has definitely the recruiting vibe. He has had a terrible year at Temple as first-time offensive coordinator for them, but Temple was terrible before he came there, so I don't think he can be necessarily blamed for that. Could he be wooed away from the AAC, bring some of that AAC recruiting connections with him to Boise State? When you talk about definite options here that bring and hit all your categories, this is a guy who could definitely come in. Now, the question is, would he be able to have success? The rushing game has been non-existent at Temple. They've been averaging 82.4 yards rushing per game, 268 yards passing. So he doesn't bring the run focus. So that would be the one thing, is would he mesh? Would it be another Tim Plough type situation where you bring in a promising guy who doesn't have the right focus? So when you bring up all these names, all of them I think are great options. My number one option would be Mike Samford. If we could get him to come back, I think he's just one of the best offensive coordinators that we've had in recent history for Boise State. Unfortunately, he was only here for 1 year. I think the abilities, the skill sets that he brings with him as far as his offensive coordinating ability and his recruiting connections would be worth the risk of him maybe only being at Boise State for a couple of seasons, because I think he would definitely view us as a part of his ladder to his goals for the career. But I think that would be worth it. If we can't get Mike Samford, I think that Kirby Moore would be my next guess. He's somebody who I think definitely has the potential to bring. He's young, he's fresh, he's moldable by Andy Avalos. He's a brand new head coach, offensive coordinator at the FBS level. He doesn't bring with him a lot of baggage or ego. He can be molded to what Andy Avalos wants him to run. I think he would excite the fan base and everything else that I said for him. I think he could definitely build into the recruiting side of things. So my number one option would be Mike Samford. If not Mike Samford, Kirby Moore. But there's definitely some other guys that Boise State could target, both inside of the family, the Boise State family, and outside there.
Yeah, and that's a great analysis there. Again, listen, okay, there's a reason why he comes on this channel, okay? There's a reason why I invite him on, all right? Everybody, appreciate my boy Jacob Blameyer. And again, something at the very end here he's going to be going after. But yeah, I love that analysis on that kind of stuff. I have a weird dilemma here because again, we had mentioned this before, but it's like Andy's great battle at Boise State is not necessarily recruiting. It's pretty easy to recruit. It's pretty easy to win. It's a great place to be. It's really safe. It's decent weather. It's got a lot of things going for it. However, the hardest part about BSU head coach is BSU defensive coordinator and BSU offensive coordinator, because you're going to be successful. They are too, and you don't have unlimited money. It's the big issue there. I think from a perspective here, Kirby Moore has been come up a lot. I actually have a couple of friends who graduated with him who are pretty close to him. The issue with him, I don't necessarily think he can't do this, but when I see Fresno State's offense, it's not RPO centric, but certainly has a lot of RPO elements to it. I don't hate that. And in fact, in certain instances, RPOs can be very advantageous. Hopefully he's able to adjust. Again, I haven't seen Fresno State come out 3 tight ends and pound the rock. But again, BSU, like we said before, I think there's certain concepts: balance, multiple formations, shifts, outthink your opponent. Don't just out physical your opponent. That's BSU game plan from there. But that is it, my friend. Dude, we have gotten after it. This was an awesome video. Hey, you had mentioned to me before this video started, and I mentioned also at the beginning of this video, what did you want to discuss here? Because there was something you had for an offer for all the fan base here.
Well, I've been building the channel. I've been building kind of the Bronco Blameyer brand here for a while, having a great just time with it. And I've started to reach out into some of the apparel options here, Christmas holiday season. So you might have noticed I've been wearing my Bronco Blameyer shirt throughout this video. If you would like to have your own Bronco Blameyer shirt, I am currently selling them. So there's a link in the description here. I'm sure Master Football will hit me, or Jake will hit me up for that. Look in the the description for a link. But we have Bronco Blameyer shirts, so check them out. Great holiday gift, great time to wear as a Boise State fan. You won't be, the great part of this is you will not be confused as a Denver fan when you're wearing this.
Yes.
There's nothing on here that screams Denver Broncos.
Yes.
So Boise State Broncos, great shirt here for you to get for the holiday season. Bronco Blameyer, make sure you look them up. A link in the description. Thanks so much for having me on. This has been awesome. I love coming on this channel. Jake will be on my channel for sure here in the future. Maybe help me preview the bowl game where I did that last season. So if we can work around his time schedule, that would be great. But this has been a fantastic video. Love talking Boise State. Thanks to everyone who stuck around here to the end. And I'll end my part of it by just saying, go Big Blue.
All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Remember, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. I really appreciate it. Go subscribe to Jake too, okay? He's awesome, all right? But I will see you guys later. I'm out.